All right, so Prime Minister Narendra Modi's America visit, day 3 of it. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the Summit of the Future at United Nations a short while back, where he spoke about a human-centric approach in resolving issues and stressed on the fact that success lies in our collective strength, not on the battlefield. Now, remember, the summit's agenda centers around peace and security, climate change, sustainable development, gender equality, and other global concerns. The 79th session of the UNGA, a gathering of international leaders in New York, comes at a critical time as the world grapples with numerous challenges from geopolitical tensions to global health crises. Remember, today is the last day of Prime Minister's 3-day US visit. Earlier, he had participated in the Quad Summit and addressed the Indian diaspora as well, where he reiterated India's aim of voicing the concerns of the global South and an emphasis on an inclusive and stable Indo-Pacific region. Before I go to my guests on the show, listen in to what PM Modi said at the United Nations General Assembly a short while back.
जून में अभी मानव इतिहास के सबसे बड़े चुनावों में भारत के लोगों ने मुझे लगातार तीसरी बार सेवा का अवसर दिया है और आज मैं इसी 1/6 ऑफ ह्यूमैनिटी की आवाज आप तक पहुंचाने यहां आया हूं। फ्रेंड्स, जब हम ग्लोबल फ्यूचर की बात कर रहे हैं तो ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक अप्रोच सर्वप्रथम होनी चाहिए। सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट को प्राथमिकता देते हुए हमें मानव कल्याण, फूड, हेल्थ सिक्योरिटी यह भी सुनिश्चित करनी होगी। भारत में 250 मिलियन लोगों को गरीबी से बाहर निकालकर हमने यह दिखाया है कि सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट कैन बी सक्सेसफुल। सक्सेस का हमारा यह अनुभव हम ग्लोबल साउथ के साथ साझा करने के लिए तैयार है। फ्रेंड्स, सक्सेस ऑफ ह्यूमैनिटी लाइज इन आवर कलेक्टिव स्ट्रेंथ, नॉट इन द बैटलफील्ड। और वैश्विक शांति एवं विकास के लिए ग्लोबल संस्थाओं में रिफॉर्म्स आवश्यक है। रिफॉर्म इज द की टू रिलेवेंस। अफ्रीकन यूनियन को नई दिल्ली समिट में G20 की स्थायी सदस्यता इसी दिशा में एक महत्वपूर्ण कदम था। वैश्विक शांति और सुरक्षा के लिए एक तरफ आतंकवाद जैसा बड़ा खतरा है तो दूसरी तरफ साइबर, मैरीटाइम, स्पेस जैसे अनेक संघर्ष के नए नए मैदान भी बन रहे हैं। इन सभी विषयों पर मैं जोर देकर कहूंगा कि ग्लोबल एक्शन मस्ट मैच ग्लोबल एम्बिशन। फ्रेंड्स, टेक्नोलॉजी के सेफ और रिस्पॉन्सिबल यूज के लिए बैलेंस रेगुलेशन की आवश्यकता है। हमें ऐसी ग्लोबल डिजिटल गवर्नेंस चाहिए जिसमें राष्ट्रीय संप्रभुता और अखंडता अक्षुण्ण रहे। डिजिटल पब्लिक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर should be a bridge, not a barrier. ग्लोबल गुड के लिए भारत अपना डिजिटल पब्लिक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पूरे विश्व से साझा करने के लिए तैयार है। फ्रेंड्स, भारत के लिए वन अर्थ, वन फैमिली, वन फ्यूचर एक कमिटमेंट है। यही कमिटमेंट हमारे one earth, one health और वन सन, वन वर्ल्ड, वन ग्रिड जैसे इनिशिएटिव्स में भी दिखाई देता है। पूरी मानवता के हितों की रक्षा और वैश्विक समृद्धि के लिए भारत मनसा वाचा कर्मणा से काम करता रहेगा। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
All right, on the show today, I'm joined by Mr. Anil Trigunayat. He's a former ambassador. I'm also joined by Ms. Veena Sikri. She's a former ambassador as well. Good evening. Namaskar to both of you. Let me start with you, Ambassador Veena Sikri, first. We just heard the Prime Minister, a short address there at the UNGA, but lots of crucial key takeaways for you. What were the big takeaways from the Prime Minister's speech?
Well, I think the most important aspect that he focused on was, I think he highlighted India's direct contribution. His speech was not full of just generalities. He spoke that we have taken 250 million people out of poverty. Sustainable development is possible. That is very important. The second point, I think he said that to be relevant, the UN has to reform. So reform is vital if you want to be relevant. Otherwise, the UN becomes irrelevant. And I think that's a very important message because this entire summit of the future has been convened in the words of the UN Secretary General himself, Antonio Guterres. He said it is to bring multilateralism back from the brink. The UN is on the verge of collapse because nobody is listening to the UN. It has made itself irrelevant. But the Prime Minister is calling for reform so that the UN can become relevant once again. I think this was a very important point that he made. And then he highlighted how we have lived up to it in our world. The G20, one earth, one family, one future. We have actually proved this. We have brought the African Union into the G20 and also what he's done for renewable energy. One grid, one sun, one earth. So, I think these messages that he has given to the world linked up at all times what India has done for itself in the last 10 years. That he is talking from his own direct experience. He's not just making some theoretical prescriptions for the world, and he's prepared to share on digital public infrastructure, on the payment system. India is the leader in the world. He said, I'm prepared to share it. So this focus on what is necessary for the world, plus what India has done with successful results and willing to share with the world. That's, I think, the big focus.
Yeah, so, a recapitulation of the past, the present, and the future of what India has been doing. But Ambassador Trigunayat, let's talk about this one by one. The fact that Prime Minister started his address by greeting everybody, saying from the world's largest democracy, namaste to everyone, to saying that I speak for 1/6 of humanity. That is, sign enough that the Indian Prime Minister is telling the world that here I am representing a country that is voice of global South, and we are going to be talking about the concerns of the global South.
Yeah, you're right. And as Ambassador Sikri also very correctly mentioned about Prime Minister's various points that he focused on, what he has basically tried to tell the world very smartly is that we are indeed the largest democracy, and that the 1/6 of the population of India, which is 1.4 billion plus, is a basic driver of that change that is going to be there. That's what he has conveyed through whether digital public infrastructure, whether through the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam philosophy, which is enshrined into one family, one future, and one world, and one great. Everything is actually looking at from that perspective of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So I think that what he's also told the world about India's one of the major achievements at the G20, that was the inclusion of the African Union, where what you mentioned is talking about being the voice of the global South without mentioning in this. Of course, the most potent, I think, the message that goes from here that if the UN does not reform, it'll become irrelevant. And that is something that is, in as many words, he has conveyed it to that. And that's the biggest threat because of which this summit is taking place. Of course, India has, and he has also said, and which is also a big gap in the world, what it says and what it does, that global action must match global ambition or aspiration. Now, those are the things that he has very clearly conveyed. And India is a willing partner. and a partner that takes on responsibility. When you talk of today's technology, it is also in the context of use of technology for destruction. So there has to be some kind of, the global acceptance, and which is in that compact, digital compact that is being signed. So I think that there are a lot of things, but as you know, that the future agreement that has been signed, essentially that is prescriptive in nature. It's in my view is a list of all the problems that the world has faced so far. How to get over it is left to each country, and I hope
Yeah,
the countries behave more responsibly henceforth, especially the superpowers.
sure. That's right. And talking about superpowers, Ambassador Veena Sikri, do you think that the inclusion of India at the UNSC as a permanent member has perhaps been the longest test of patience for India? The fact that big Western superpowers do not want countries of the global south to be at that table?
Well, I think we have to also recall that this permanent seat at the UN Security Council was on offer for India many decades ago, but it was turned down by our own leadership at that time, who preferred to see that, oh, let China take it kind of thing. So I think we have to recall that once you miss an opportunity, it's decades before the opportunity comes around again. But I think one point is there that the world has definitely recognized now that you cannot have a UN Security Council, the world's highest decision-making body at the multilateral level, without the inclusion of a country like India. In fact, the reason that the UN Security Council is so ineffective today is because the key players are not there, and you have a completely lopsided representation. The US government, I understand, has put forward a proposal at this very UN summit of the future, where they have called for the expansion of the UN Security Council, and they've asked for the increase in the number of permanent members of the UN Security Council. India is in that list, but this is without giving them the veto power. Now, I think this is going to be negotiated. I do not know what will finally come out in the text that we will soon see at the end of the UN Summit of the Future, but I do see that the UN Security Council reform cannot be left out of the document. If the UN Secretary General and the rest of the leaders want the summit to be declared any kind of success, they have to address this question of the UN Security Council reform. Otherwise, the UN remains completely irrelevant. There is one point also, I think, that that I would like to stress in Prime Minister Modi's speech, that he called for a human-centric approach. I think this is a very interesting and important point for our Prime Minister to draw the attention of the world to, because, in the world, particularly in America, profits is everything. Money is everything. The bottom line is money. Otherwise, people don't matter. But to take this humanist approach at the world stage and as leader of the global south, for our Prime Minister to remind the world that unless we have a human-centric approach, we will have no solutions that are worth the name, because we're not thinking about the people whom these solutions are meant for. That's the people. We have to put the people first. I think this is very important, what he said.
Yeah, and I think that is the stance of India is also, why countries who are directly involved in the conflict have been urging for India to be a mediator in that conflict. But Ambassador Trigunayat, when we talk about the voice of the global south, India has been reiterating and constantly pitching itself as the voice of the global south. Clearly, China disagrees, and for most of the world, does that dehyphenation exist between India and China? What India gets to the table, what China gets to the table, or do they view this as one complete, Southeast Asian region, which needs to be sort of, categorized in one entire bloc?
No, I don't think so. I mean, in fact, India and China, they are very clearly distinguished at the global level, especially by those powers that matter and by the global south itself. Global south looks at India as a benign power, a power that is looking to help them, and which has shown, does not only preach it, but has shown by example. But during the pandemic, you have seen, while China became the cause of that all mayhem that happened across the world, the Western countries were hoarding the vaccines that for the geopolitical ends, which they did not even were not using it for their own country. India, on the other hand, supplied to the rest of the world despite having a major need within the country itself. I mean, 1/6 of the humanity needed to be catered, but we looked at it from a global perspective, from a larger perspective for the health, because one health, one world. When he talks about it, that's what he means, that it's for everyone. And that's the difference between India and China's approaches. And countries, wherever China has succeeded, frankly, it has been also a problem at our end because we have let it be. We have not been there. There's a tremendous goodwill for India on the ground. And there are a umpteen number of examples, and we have done so. And the G20 getting African Union into that, holding 3 Voice of Global South summits, not one. I mean, you all know that any consultant can write a 500-page report on what are the requirements of the developing world is. It could have been done by that in India. There are plenty of people who can write that. But at the same time, Prime Minister decided that we should have them talk about what are the requirements, what are those needs, and how those needs to be factored into the G20 deliberations or at the UN deliberations, where he's talking of these SDGs that have been put on the back burner because of the pandemic, because of the selfish attitude of various powers and the Russia-Ukraine war, which has impacted them adversely and disproportionately.
Okay.
So I think that those are very important things. That's where India stands apart from China, and the world understands. That's the reason you are there in the G7 all along. 11, 12 times you have participated there. For everything that matters in the world, India factors it. Its voice is factored in, and that happens because of that. Russia, if it trusts India, Ukraine also trusts with India. China is there, but it's not being trusted by the West. So you have that kind of heft, which I don't think China has in the changing paradigm that is taking place today in the global discourse.
Okay, let's also talk about the changing paradigm. Ambassador Veena Sikri, considering the kind of geopolitical divisions and situations that we are seeing out of the wars that have now broken out, multilateralism clearly is a key focus and something that the countries across the world will aim at. How difficult would it be to actually achieve multilateralism, considering the fact that we're now seeing Cold Era war-like blocs once again?
Yes, this is being called Cold War II, the situation that has evolved after 2 years of the of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And, I agree with you, but I think we must remember both the statements that our Prime Minister has made. One is he said earlier, this is not the era of war, and he told both the leaders, President Putin and President Zelensky, about that today. And today he said that the collective strength is what is necessary, not battlefield victories. Collective strength of the people of the world for the benefit of humanity. And we must work together to get away from thinking that the battlefield is what will provide us with supremacy. Battlefield will in fact destroy the whole world because the weapons of mass destruction that exist, there's going to be no one left. I mean, even the people who are themselves warring with each other are not going to be left to say that one side or the other has a victory. So I think this reminder from the Prime Minister is very relevant. Now the question is that is the UN ready to serve as that collective strength to provide peace to the world? This is the question. And it is clear that with the existing institutions of the United Nations, whether it is the Security Council, whether it is the financial institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, others, none of these are capable today of providing that kind of collective solutions that will be beneficial and will, with all the rest of the world, will accept. That is why there are individual efforts. Now, our Prime Minister has met President Putin, he has met President Zelensky. We're looking at different ways to find possible solutions. Nobody knows where the solution will emerge, but these efforts have needed to arise because the UN has failed. And I think our Prime Minister is drawing attention to that we must reform the UN. And that is what we're going to
there are
to see
several questions, of course, Ambassador Sikri. Which have been raised on the relevance of the United Nations. But before I wrap up, a quick word from you, Ambassador Trigunayat, this overall visit of the Prime Minister to America, your big takeaways from this visit. There was a lot of emphasis on an inclusive Indo-Pacific. Semiconductors were focused upon. For you, what are the big takeaways from this visit?
Well, I think that this was a very important visit, which was bilateral, plurilateral, and multilateral in nature. And the objective of all the three have been achieved. One of the most important things has been bilaterally with the United States, talking to them mainly about the global conflicts that are taking place, where India is trying to play a peacemaker role. and of course, getting all the technologies that we have been talking about, expediting all those. That's very important for us. Secondly, in the Quad, India's imprint is very clear on the Quad Declaration. If you were to see from in all initiatives that are there, whether it's the health security down to the Metri in that domain. Secondly, I think that one of the key initiatives here is to tell the world at the multilateral level that we've got to be serious about these reforms, and that's important. And let these organizations become totally irrelevant.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much to both of you, Ambassador Veena Sikri and Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, for joining us on the show tonight and sharing your perspective. Namaskar. Thank you very much. With that,